Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Industry, an esports insider podcast where I speak to people and personalities within the esports sector. In today's episode, I'm joined by Grid Esports' CEO and founder, Moritz Maurer, where we talk about, the power of third-party partnerships in esports. In particular, we talk about the relationships between third-party companies and game developers, but then also organizations, federations, and tournament organizers as well. Given the fact that Grid Esports is also a data company, we do delve into some of their specific partnerships and how data is integral to the esports ecosystem across a variety of sectors. It's a great chat to talk about how a third-party company works within the esports ecosystem, which isn't directly tied to the game itself. I think it's a really fascinating conversation about the landscape of esports as a whole. So hopefully you enjoy it. So let's jump in with the episode. So Moritz, it's a pleasure to have you on The Industry. It's a pleasure to talk about, partnerships and data and everything in between, really. But I guess the first thing is, I want you to talk about yourself for a little bit. Just give us a couple, sentences or a couple minutes just to explain yourself, a little bit about Grid, and then we're going to delve, straight into everything else.
Sounds good. Hi, Tom. Pleasure to be here. And thanks for having me. Myself, I'm going to talk about esports and data and games, stuff I love. I basically started at the intersection of all these topics, about 12 years ago. The topic of data and what you can do with it in games, I always thought interesting, even as a player previously, for theory crafting stuff or using it to find an edge in your strategy it's always something fascinating me. So the first business I set up was the first UK Gambling Commission regulated bookmaker for esports. It's a business that naturally relies a lot on data analytics, statistics, and modeling of the data. Operated it for a few years, exited to Genius Sports. They're a leader in sports and data in traditional sports. So when I joined them, I led their foray into esports, which was very new at the time, established them as a leader, and we were offering kind of the first managed trading solution in the regulated betting market for esports, which was very exciting. Learned a lot about data licensing in sports, so we've emulated that business model. That works with rights holders, or recognizes them as such in sports, and emulated it for esports with tournament organizers at the start. Extensively dealt with integrity threats during my career there, and also a lot of data challenges, and some of them arising from the fact that just sports and sports data is very different to esports, and ultimately left to really focus on the challenges in making the data available in the first place, and making it accessible and empowering people who want to build with it. So very much like myself, but years before that, but doing so with a vision that had a clear idea about rights holders, about alignment with them being important. This is why we only cater to official data. Another learning very much informed from the way data and technology in sports, it's very vertically, sport by sport, while in esports, given just the nature of it and how fast it evolves, this model clashed with that. So basically thinking about how do you build infrastructure, how do you make it that it scales well and that it's reliable and that it can adapt well to challenges that are more unique to esports, not so apparent in sports. And lastly, just focusing on doing it right and building the technology necessary to get more people to be able to work with data and unlock the potential of that data for all stakeholders in that ecosystem that I'm passionate about, similarly to a large team at Grid now. And it's been an amazing journey. And now being able to work with the likes of Riot Games, Ubisoft, Craft, and it's awesome. I speak for many in our team that it's so cool to work with the games, contribute to the ecosystem that you're intrinsically excited about, that you're a fan of as a player, as a viewer, and innovating there, being kind of really at the forefront and breaking new ground. So I don't know if this is what you're looking for me about myself, but love the topic, passionate about what we do, and very thankful for where we are at this point. And excited to be here today and chat to you.
And we're definitely going to talk about all the different use cases in which data can be used when we go through some of these partnerships. But yeah, I guess I want to kind of bring it in a little bit and talk about kind of partnerships in esports and gaming in general then, because one reason why I really wanted to chat with you about this is because, at least from chatting with you and conversing with you in the past, partnerships are such an integral part to the job and the role which you have, right? With data, you need those partnerships in a sense to kind of enhance data capabilities. Like how do you think esports partnerships have changed from when you first started with Grid to kind of now? Is there a lot more like willingness to team up and partner?
I'll give you kind of the perspective from the partner and then the perspective like we have as a business. So since we started, the topic of data gained a lot of traction. As I said before, we did some of the first rights holder transactions. The concept of recognizing data as an asset as part of the game IP wasn't established at all. And also at the same time, with like one or two exceptions, data was widely inaccessible. So the status quo when we started was, there's some people were scraping data. Everybody would hack together kind of what they could if they needed to rely on it. No one really looked at it as a means to empower your community, as a revenue driver, as an asset that you want to control, similar to any other game IP, as a way to improve the game, to have a better bearing, to drive better decisions as a game developer. So when we started, it was very much a lot of believing and kind of feeling, knowing that there's something, then finding success with partners, building this into long-term partnerships, creating success stories around it. While now, I feel the paradigm has shifted a lot. It's a topic a lot more people talk about. One of the trends I think that underscores this is like what you see in this creator economy, like all these ecosystems like UFN, UGC as a trend in general. I think the gaming industry has made strides in recognizing that there's immense value, passion, innovation, and ingenuity in their community. So data is the naturally one thing you look at where people could jump on and build cool stuff and add value and engage with your game and your worlds in another way. So the partnerships we did at the start, they focused very much just around esports and making it more sustainable and doing what I look back now is more basic stuff. But what we built then over the 5 years, the technology to do a lot more and to have a value proposition directly for the game developers, not just like tournament organizers. And that's that. So I think from the perspective of our partners also, so generally this is the topic and what we cater to is more recognized. So you want someone that's super specialized in it, is in general. What we learned, great game developers focus on creating amazing games. If you want to build data infrastructure, but you have to unlock all that value, it's a large undertaking. It's costly. It takes time. It takes focus away. And at the end of the day, you're not going to do it in the same way that someone exclusively specialized on the topic is going to do. So that's kind of how it evolved. I think the partnership model and the theme behind it never changed. But the value proposition is certainly like refined and is reflecting the state of the market, especially our segment of it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting when you mention that, because I feel like early on when game developers were kind of wanting to build esports ecosystems in general, it was very much we're going to hold on to this and we're going to kind of develop it ourselves. We're going to do everything involved with it. When now there's a lot more third parties starting to get involved, right? Whether it's production, whether it's data, whether it's even tournament organization. Is that a trend then you kind of just continue seeing happening? Like the games developers kind of focusing on the games and then the actual third parties around it who specialize in those things coming more into the industry as itself?
In general, as a founder, as a entrepreneur, like my entire career basically, there's something incredibly powerful about focus. Like you can only be really good and far ahead of anybody else in kind of one thing. If you spread what you do too broadly, you're going to lose that edge. So as you said, the entities focusing on specific competencies that all matter to make esports what it is ultimately a recipe, I think, that works and that then invites more stakeholders to it. It creates healthy competition, and that results in more quality, better experiences for users, larger events, more innovation. That being said, we also have to be like honest. In esports for a while, esports was majorly a marketing play at the start. Esports as a proper business, there's always been hype around it. Some of it was maybe not that justified. A lot was conflated with the market size, was always conflated with gaming, all of these things. So for esports alone, what we're seeing now, there's been certainly a bit of a correction in the market, but the models that we see emerging now are a lot more sustainable, and esports as a business generally has a bright future, I would say. And the game developers are looking at it that way. And if the investment in it from their end is not showing a good ROI, then that's not good, and it's not going to aid the longevity of an esports ecosystem. But if you find the right partners to do it well, then you can, and it's a more balanced approach ultimately.
And then how good is it then for third-party companies such as yourself to start kind of delving into other areas as well? I guess to move on to it a little bit, you had labeled yourself at the beginning anyway as an esports data platform, Grid Esports, right? Well, now, literally from like the last time we did the podcast, I think it was like 2 years ago, there's an industry. This is how long the industry's been going on, I guess, at this point. But it was an esports data back then, but now it's game data. Why did you decide to kind of branch out into more the game data moniker as opposed to just sticking with esports?
I think it happened pretty naturally. I think a main driver behind it was simply recognizing that, when we started, I looked at game developers and thinking, these are these esteemed billion-dollar software houses. They will have their data figured out. There will be APIs. It will work perfectly. There's a large team behind it, and that's just not the case, So while building out that infrastructure and different tools for extraction, processing, management, distribution of data on our platform, we just recognized, equipping a game with an API in the first place seems to be kind of where we should start if we want everything to run smooth, and we want to tap into the potential that the digital nature of esports holds from a data perspective. And this is why we always shied away from, screen scraping or other dissemination forms. The perfect data is somewhere, so this is what you want to get to. I don't believe in any technological crutches instead of the real deal. So out of that, naturally, the scope of our partnerships have expanded. And so it's about data and the accessibility and serving different user groups or different use cases with a tailored solution, understanding what they need, ring fencing data, ensuring its integrity safe, general data security is a large thing. These are all the things we've built out naturally on our platform. And if you're a game developer and you're looking to make your data available, these are all things you would have to cater to yourself and manage. And handling that with a platform specialized on it is a lot more appealing. And so naturally, with our partners, we expanded into this direction. And it's exciting. Like, I also like the idea that, we can go beyond esports and serve more competitive tiers in an ecosystem. Because especially lower teams kind of almost benefit from it even more. Yeah, so there's even more you can add in value.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to touch on how that can do in a couple of the partnerships in a second. I guess just to have one last point on this though, and I think it's really interesting to say that Grid obviously partners with a lot of game publishers, but then you yourself then work with a lot of other companies who then want that data afterwards as well, right? I'm talking about sometimes like bookmakers, sometimes other data companies themselves and whatnot. Like, what goes into actually for you being the company that maybe people are reaching out to? what goes into actually establishing those partnerships, and what are the do's and don'ts in terms of what do you tell a bookmaker if they were to say, hey, we want some of this esports data, for example?
Before jumping like in a specific customer example, like from a game developer standpoint, there's kind of two things if you want to get data right and really tap into it. There's a technological thing, and there's ways to solve it, or we develop ways to solve it. And many game developers, not like they're blind to it. They all recognize the value of it. Some have built internal systems, but they haven't built the infrastructure around it to have an API that can be serviced with SLAs you can commit to downstream and to, support data users, especially commercial clients, properly. So next to the technology bit, there's an operational competency that has to be looked after, performing due diligence on your partners, understanding what they're going to do with the data, defining a license scope. We agree with our partners, our game developers usually, like, what do you want to make available? What is the appropriate amount of data? What level of granularity should be available? What are rate limits of the API? What are settings on the delay? What is the level of support we want to give? And then we kind of segment it. And then suddenly, what is this vast space? And you will be surprised just how many people build so many different things that we see that are created on our platform these days. You want to make that manageable and be able to cater to it at scale. So that's ultimately the main bit. And then an example, a bookmaker, betting, incredibly data-driven, data-relied industry as a whole. So they want to do it right. They want to use our data to build their own predictive models, build cool visualizations around it, make esports and esports betting on their site more accessible for the end user, easier to understand, ultimately driving informed decision-making, which betting is, make it engaging. So in a combination of streaming, widgets, data, insights, cool stats and predictions, all of that together, you can create these really cool experiences. So we want to understand what their strategy is like when we speak to them. Is it just, hey, do you just also need to have esports next to 50 other sports? Or are you looking to invest into this? Do you want to make this, do you want to establish your brand in it? Are there specific games? In which markets are you active? Esports is incredibly global, but games certainly have very regional and cultural, specific differences there. So we guide all of this and find the right solution and equip them with the portfolio and assets they need to make it work. And do all of it again, like in alignment with the partners from whom we source the data.
So let's talk about then some of these major partnerships. I think the one we've got to start off with is the one with Riot Games. It was announced like a major partnership that obviously first started with League of Legends, has now since gone into Valorant as well.
It started with Valorant and went into League of Legends.
Started with Valorant, then went into League of Legends. It went the opposite way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like I said, a really major partner for Grid. How did that collaboration come about? And what is like actually the main focus of that? Because I think a lot of people know what the Grid and Riot Games partnership is without actually probably knowing that it's necessarily a Grid partnership just because of the scope of what it is, right?
I'm a huge fan of Riot. Like esports for me, like, okay, it started with StarCraft, but it became big and I was excited kind of beyond belief, like with like League of Legends becoming popular and the emergence of Twitch kind of really coincided. And when that was a thing and you watched with your friends, that was so awesome. So it started for me with League. And it was really a dream to work with that company that I think has done the most for esports. Like the way they invested into it, the way looking after it, they are the first to kind of have seen it as a business, has set it up in that way, have majorly invested, resourced it properly, have great people working there. So when we first partnered for Valorant, which was still like fairly new at the time, was maybe out for 1-2 years, was already on a massive growth trajectory. That was super exciting because I also love that game. And obviously in the past, we worked a lot with Counter-Strike and other FPS titles. So there's obviously similarities. We could kind of exploit to get off the ground quicker, to build out data infrastructure for that game. But in that initial partnership, we did a few things. One, like as data distribution partner, we cater to an ecosystem and different commercial verticals that rely on that data and unlock that as a revenue stream for Riot, and ultimately did it also in a way that they maintain control over their IP, could set up certain like guardrails and measures to, especially around integrity for the ecosystem, that was aligned with their vision for the game and how they want the esports to develop. And also, we launched a Valorant data portal, which was the first FPS game to be supported with a data portal specifically tailored for teams. So a universal entry point for any team, access to their data, to their scrims, creating a level playing field around the access to stats and data, with like Riot's vision again to empower their ecosystem, make it as appealing as possible to be in their competitive ecosystem, because you get supported as great tools that the teams can access. And we found so much alignment in that. So I think the expansion to League of Legends was felt very natural. We had, we went live very quickly after signing and announcing the deal. And League of Legends is like arguably like the most developed ecosystem in the way it's set up in esports. And it's great. So here again, all the things I mentioned are similar, working as exclusive distribution partner, supporting the competitive scene with our portals, but also a lot beyond that. Not so much I can share on this podcast today, but I'll surely keep you in the loop once we're ready to announce. But all things esports data basically is where they rely on us to make it as good as possible for the stakeholders in the ecosystem.
And to talk about then the data portal in particular, maybe more so the Valorant one then as opposed to the League of Legends one, like what exactly are teams able to kind of do with this data now, which necessarily they weren't able to do in the past?
If you're a team in the kind of top leagues, you have access on Grid's platform to the data of your own games and the matches played in your league. That means, different API files, depending on what you're looking for, which you can use directly. You can also like allocate a seat to an analytics company you might be working with, or your coach and analyst, and the teams get to manage this and the access in our software to data assets for their esports. On top of that, if they're scrimming in a separate ring-fenced environment, the data is then only made available to both the teams participating in that, which helps them massively. We see like an insane amount of activity of pro teams in this, always after a patch, before a season starts. There's always a lot going on, and then generally during competitive play as well. So what it means is they're not left to their own terms when they need to have data, reliable, accurate information for their gameplay and their competitors. And when they think about coaching, talent scouting, that can work in a way more data-driven way. And as I said before, creating this level playing field around that is super important. And that's ultimately what that achieves.
I think what's incredibly fascinating about it is I think a lot of people look at esports data and do automatically think betting, and I think it's really interesting to have this, and this is why I wanted to bring this one up, is that this is completely different than what a lot of people I think would typically see esports data be used for, but it really is quite common sense in the sense of you look at data analysis essentially and having kind of this company being able to provide that to other teams themselves. I think it's definitely very fascinating, and I think it's also another facet on how you can kind of utilize, I guess, a third party to create these other things. Because I guess for Riot Games to essentially do all this, it would essentially take another grid, essentially, right? To be doing something to this level.
It's it's similar, like I mean, would every large game developer want to build out their own kind of platform? Would that be feasible? What would that mean for the market? So many different sources, maybe completely inconsistent format. So, kind of centralizing it, creating a standard around it is super valuable for the end users. It makes it way easier for anybody working with data on a platform to take something they developed and one title, cross-pollinate other game titles with it. And on your first point, I don't think so many equate like data with betting anymore, but I see where you're coming from. But if you think about, there's so much that has to happen from the extraction to processing it, mapping it against like our game title agnostic format, serving it, and then there's different use cases. One of them is regulated betting with very specific requirements, of course, and like requires a lot more due diligence, a more robust framework to interact with a highly regulated space. But besides that, you have like all the things you do in broadcast innovation, all the things you do in fan engagement. We spoke about coaching and talent scouting. Then you have the community. We're so invested in like making the data available also at no cost to, the scholastic space, pre-revenue startups, people wanting to innovate and get off the ground. So there's like a myriad of other things. The role here is really to be the platform to empower innovation and do this across many different areas down the line.
Another partnership that I really am interested to speak about as well is the one with Kesper, right? This is the newest one that recently happened as well. And I'm really interested to see how much obviously you can say about this, but how this actually does work compared to a game publisher. Because for people who are unaware, Kesper is the Korean Esports Federation, so it's an actual federation partnering with Grid themselves. So how does a partnership like that differ than, say, a publisher themselves, right?
Yeah, so with these kind of partnerships, again, they are also doing a lot in grassroots esports. They're supporting the scene. They're creating a foundation for that. They're making it viable for people in South Korea to become athletes. They've laid out a pathway. There's subsidies, there's incentives. They create a really robust framework. And we're speaking about Korea here. So arguably the birthplace of esports. So they are one of the very few like government like supported bodies that is able to like do something meaningful, and you can see they have such a thriving ecosystem around it, and they're also incredibly successful in most games that are popular in their country because they very early invested into this. So it's almost like a generational advantage, and generations, I would say, in esports are a bit shorter than in general, so it's because it's so fast paced. So our partnership here is kind of designed to any of the aspects in these topics I mentioned where data can help. Also the integrity side of esports, that is well supported. And, having met them many times now, it's great to work with them. They absolutely get it. And I think they're one of the entities that can also really like bring esports forward on the global stage. So what we're doing there is just, being helpful and being an ally in what they want to achieve, because we're fully aligned with that and their vision for the future of esports.
Seeing a Korean like esports federation, like you said, with Korea itself being like, South Korea itself being like one of the biggest players in the esports game, right? Do you think that the fact that South Korea has been very well known to legitimize esports to a sense as well really kind of helped make this partnership a little bit easier per se? I'm not going to call out other federations and stuff, but other regions which maybe don't accept esports as much. Did it make it a bit easier knowing that there is this bigger acceptance within esports and willingness from not just the federation themselves, but the actual country itself as well?
Because they're successful and they can point at so many successful case studies and benefits in their society and the ecosystem they built around it. It makes it way easier for others to invest because they can point to that as, look at what this can do. Look at how great this is for our youth. Look how well this interacts with education and other initiatives that are important for these countries. So there, I think, because they're a trailblazer, they're aiding the ecosystem overall. Like when I started like 12, 13 years ago, the fact that Korea was already so developed and esports players, they already had a superstar status at the time, made it way easier to explain to my mom what I'm now doing. And then also initial investors later on. But when it comes to the education on the topic, they were kind of on the same level. Yeah. So this is why exciting to work with that region. We also have staff in Seoul, and it's just it's really good. And this is exactly what we set out to do. We care about the ecosystem. We're super passionate being in it. So you want to align with the players who matter.
So we've talked about how partnerships can help from the betting sector. We've talked about how partnerships can help from a data and analysis sector, from a grassroots esports sector. Let's talk a little bit about fan engagement then. Like how does data kind of help with fan engagement, and how have you utilized partnerships to bring more fan engagement opportunities to, well, fans? That's what it's about. We're engaging fans, right? So yeah. How has that managed to happen?
If you think about like esports, the average fan is so well educated about their game. It's fascinating. So the people that play, and they play actively, they play a lot, and they will know like every little thing about it. So this creates a great opportunity, because if you have like a portion of your audience that is so dialed in, that is really up to date on the meta game, making deeper stats and analytics available is driving their engagement and can create cool conversational pieces around it and good storylines. So for this side, like the real kind of hardcore user fan, this is where it opens a lot of opportunities. And in engaging these fans, how can you make this available on the broadcast or on social media and in other ways to unlock that is kind of what I'm speaking about here. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which I have to unfortunately admit, like I also fall into in many games, like people who played a lot, but don't play anymore, mainly watch now. With data and stats, you can still keep things exciting, drive engagement, but drive accessibility. Like, why was this a big play? Why did this matter? Did this move the needle? Wow, this was a huge comeback. Contextualizing all of this information with stats and data also caters to this side really well. So that's just my general thinking or concepts when I speak about fan engagement. Then what to actually do with it is, there's loads of companies innovating in that space. At the end of the day, what you see on the broadcast, either directly or indirectly, there's a lot more that is actually quite data-driven than you might think. And, when we develop the storylines of upcoming talent, what do we do to underscore how amazing they were or how great this guy was at this tournament? It's by contextualizing their performance against their own historic averages or the tournament or other points. And there's so many examples out there. It's not a goal that everybody thinks about data all the time. It's just, it is there and it adds value, and usually people work with involved, they see this, but they want to make it seamless in how it is part of the experience for the fan.
I think it's actually interesting when you say that, because I think just consumers in general are innately a little bit more data focused now than what it seems like in the past, especially I think with access to more information and more, ability to gain more knowledge. I'm not even just talking about esports in general, but entertainment, sports, esports as a whole. Like you look at the likes of football now with XG and, shots percentage, and there's loads of other different companies which are very literally focused on purely providing stats to drive narratives. It makes sense for esports to fall that way, especially when we're brought up as a community, which is brought up on even like things like patch notes and the game simply changing, right?
I mean, even I was just in Sao Paulo at the Sixth Invitational, which was phenomenal, by the way. And I love to see that, part of the show was also the reveal of kind of the next patch, the next season changes in the games. And this really alludes to the point I made earlier. Like the fan watching there also really cares about the game. So it was kind of cool. I think Ubisoft announced like 8 or 9 different things. 7 definitely got a big cheer. Yeah. So they're like, okay, good. This was received well. It's pretty cool. I don't know what was going on in Twitch chat at the same time, but this stuff is really cool because it's part of it. And to what you just said, like the more data-driven consumer, like look at traditional sports. Like often when we work with a partner, sometimes a headline of one of the kind of deliverables is figure out the quarterback rating kind of thing for that game, which is inherently data-driven. It creates cool storylines. So that is very much part of kind of the pitch and the value proposition ultimately. And it's happening more and more in sport, and esports being inherently digital, as I said before, just lends itself well. It's also so fast-paced. Now there's just so much going on. Especially think about like mobile games, there's a lot to break down. And stats really help with that.
And every game, well, at least most games, have a scoreboard, leaderboard integrated in the games themselves, especially the FPS scene, but the MOBA scene as well. You kind of come blind to it a little bit, but you forget that there is just this massive box at the bottom, right, which has got loads of stats in.
All the time. I mean, you see this like even when you play, like so if your KDA is not looking very good, like people will tell you. So you're right. It naturally found its way into the experience already. That being said, we love the idea to experiment about making that deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of great third parties that do it, but generally game developers are investing into it more. It's a great way to kind of like get your audience to stay within your game, do their research there, compare their stats to the pro player, or find the best comparison for the role or the type of player you are. So there's more we can do. This is where we're hoping to innovate in the coming years as well.
As a final question on this point about partnerships with game publishers, I think what's fascinating to me is I really want to find out like what's the kind of differences when talking to different game publishers. Have you seen publishers have different kind of ideas on what they want when it comes to certain partnerships, or have they all been kind of aligned in a certain way? Like, what are some of the differences when you talk to the likes of Ubisoft, Krafton, Riot Games, for example?
It is actually, well, I don't know if it's surprisingly, but it's usually quite different. This depends on how they think about esports, how they think about their game, how much they work with third parties in general. And often it's also just how this company is structured and culturally set up in how things work. So there's vast differences. Like at the end of the day, like we're a platform, we can technically work with any game of any size. These big deals, we equip smaller games with our SDK with an API in the past. And next week I'm heading to GDC and we're hoping to do a lot more of that. So technically, we can work with everybody. If they fall within any really established competitive genre, it's incredibly easy and seamless to switch them on. So the reason I bring this up is lower developed titles who are earlier in the development and game cycle have completely different needs than a title that has had a successful esports for 10 years. So the maturity and kind of their development over time, this impacts what the value proposition majorly revolves around. A game that's kind of early in it, they look to work with us and our partners to set up a great competitive ecosystem, support the launch of the game, and the establishment of a competitive scene. While others, they're very invested, have a thriving ecosystem already that they want to empower. And then others, just want to make esports more sustainable, profitable, make better teams available, and really set a very high standard for how they work. The nice thing about being a startup, and I hope you never lose this, you're very agile, and this nimbleness and navigating the different needs is something that's exciting, because I don't think, especially deals at that scale, there's one blueprint that works for all. And that's a good thing.
I think it's fascinating when you actually mention that, because what that kind of then made me remind me of is that how esports and game publishers are also developing themselves, right? Like a lot of game publishers, I mean, the concept of a multiplayer online esports focused game was alien probably 20 years ago, right? Probably even longer than that. Obviously, you had like certain cases, but now game publishers are also starting to create online only games, specifically game studios specifically tailored towards that. And I guess with that, they also have to learn about working with other third parties. It's no longer like we're going to create a game which is purely single player. And obviously those games still exist and a lot of them are still successful to this day. But there is now this kind of other avenue which a game publisher also has to learn about in a collaborative way. Weirdly, it's bringing everybody together, right?
I mean, we live in the games as a live service reality for, especially in competitive space. So what that does is the lifetime, that a game IP is designed for is way longer already at the inception. And that changes how you can think about the game and the worlds you're building and how you want to engage your community. You think more years in advance, which means you can, take on more ambitious projects that will probably take longer to come to fruition, which is great. The most successful titles in esports still, they have 10 years plus legacy in many cases. We spoke about generational themes before. There's, I think, Dota is probably played now and watched by a lot of kids of people who played Dota when they were still in Warcraft 3. Yeah, so I think that's just that's exciting, and it also, you could almost say it adds that kind of thing that you would have in football, like where you go to the stadium with your kids because you watched that team for 30 years. So you can, with this generation shift and more longevity of the game IPs in general, it unlocks completely different opportunities.
As a final question, Moritz, as well, I think it'd be really fascinating to see your thought on, with third parties now starting to come through a lot more, whether it be the data, but then whether it be a lot of other industries. Do you think that this will help at least alleviate some of the pressure from game developers and publishers themselves to create ecosystems that they need to be? Because obviously we are in a little bit of a financial, not crisis, but a financial issue and sustainability problem right now with esports. Do you think that collaborating with these third parties will help in the future?
This is not a new thing. Third parties have always been involved in some ways in esports. Like tournament organizers, do they run events in their own name, or are they a service or production partner to a company? Are different business models, arguably. But this has always been an inherent part of esports and competitive gaming, I would argue. So on that, and like regarding the second part of your question, I'm not a fan of this whole esports winter talk. Okay.
I tried not to say it. That's why I tried to think of something
good,
else.
But I'm just saying, I see this on LinkedIn a lot. Look, what happened for us is there's been more focus on like established, sustainable, and scalable revenue channels that matter for the game, that have a lot more planning security associated to them, which is all true for if you think about data. And we went through a period, also, by the way, not just esports, kind of the world with massively inflated valuations, and to make good on these is then very hard. So the correction that we're seeing, I think, is good, because it means, of course, there will be some consolidation happening. We see this in gaming and in esports, but the bottom line of it is the models that survive are kind of future-proofed, and they have proven kind of their resilience against an economic downturn. And naturally, during that time, people think about more sustainable ways to grow the ecosystem, to grow the pie for everybody. And that's good, because for us, especially being a startup, you're highly dependent on that and the state of the market and whatnot. But finding success in that time is usually when you forge really strong alliances, good partnerships, and the value that you prove kind of comes with, an extra benefit and recognition. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on, and I don't like the esports winter talk because it's missing out on that there's also great opportunity, and that esports also in many areas is actually thriving and expanding.
Yeah, I think definitely when you look at the likes of like Southeast Asia, well, Asia in particular is normally like a booming industry. I know that Blast themselves, a tournament organizer, has come out and said that they are profitable, so it's like there are cases, G2, there are loads of other cases, right, of companies still thriving in that environment as well. Moritz, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I want to leave the final words to you, though, before I send everybody home to check out all the other videos, including a really great one by, I'm going to shout her out, Dominica. She also did an industry podcast with us as well a couple of years ago with Kerry as well, who's now also at Grid. So I think that's fascinating to say. But what have you got any final words to say just on the topic as a whole before I send us home?
Yeah, so she's a superstar and Carrie's amazing too. And I'm so happy to have amazing people like this in the team. And no final words. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And data in gaming is a big deal. And if you ever thought about doing anything with it, please talk to us. Grid.gg or find us at GDC.
And what's the I was going to say Twitter. I'm still going to say Twitter handle. What's the Twitter/X handle then for people to reach out?
That's a good question. But if you look for Grid Esports, you're probably going to find us.
Perfect.
Thank you
so much, Moritz. I really appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time for chatting to me.
Sounds good. Take care, Tom. All the best. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that was my conversation with Moritz. It was a pleasure to have him on and talk about everything that is happening with Grid Esports. If you do like this type of content, don't forget to follow us on all of our social medias with Esports Insider. We do B2B business coverage. Then also we have more podcasts as well. We have them on Spotify and on YouTube. So don't forget to follow those channels as well. But until then, I'll see you next time.